Inside Huntsville with Brenda Martin, a conversation with department heads at City Hall on streets, ball fields, public safety, and more. And also with our community partners that add economic security, support education, and enhance the city's quality of life.
Hello, I'm Brenda Martin with Inside Huntsville. Thanks for joining me today. Our program is designed to give you, our citizens, an inside look at various departments for your benefit. After all, you are the city's customer. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with the Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Management, Danny Shea. Danny, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm very happy to be here.
It's been a while. We have been trying to do this now at least about a year or so.
Because we're both so busy.
So busy, okay. But I tell you, I am so glad to finally have you on the show. There are two divisions in your department, Natural Resources and Environmental Management. Let's first talk about air pollution control.
Air pollution control is probably our principal activity. It occupies the greatest amount of our time and effort. And Huntsville is one of two local air pollution control programs in Alabama. So instead of EPA or the state environmental agency implementing the air pollution control program, it's actually the city that does that. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of things that are involved in that. Permitting and inspection of industrial facilities, monitoring the air quality in the ambient air. Mm-hmm. And the city has comprehensive air pollution control regulations.
So those are the things that are involved in administering the APC program?
Right.
Okay. Danny, we must talk about the 2016 Air Pollution Achievement Awards that were recently held and announced and recognized in a special ceremony by Mayor Tommy Battle, and that's pretty huge in this community. Talk about that a little bit.
In 1997, the Air Pollution Control Board they launched the awards program. So we've been doing it not quite 20 years, but it's getting pretty close.
Almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years. And what the program is designed to do is to recognize efforts by local businesses and industrial facilities to voluntarily go beyond what the regulations require in terms of controlling their emissions. And then several years after the program was initially established, the board established a second category for air quality education, mm-hmm. for educating the public. So 4 companies were recognized for reducing emissions, 3 of them, that's in 2016, 3 of them for very significant energy savings projects. Those were Northrop Grumman, PPG Aerospace, and Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Alabama. And a 4th company was recognized for reducing process emissions, and that was Sanmina Corporation, for reducing organic compound emissions from their electronics assembly processes. And then finally, there was an Air Quality Education Award that was given to the Alabama Center for Sustainable Energy. So that's something that the mayor has been very supportive of and has participated in for years.
So, you know, for someone like me who does not quite understand in detail all of this, talk a little bit about Northrop Grumman's corporation. What exactly did they do to receive this?
They, a number of things. They have several facilities here in Huntsville, mm-hmm. and they actually implemented energy conservation measures at each of them. Examples of the things they did were installing new, much more efficient air conditioning equipment in their computer rooms, okay. Automated lighting and controls of the lighting, so lights are turned off when they're not in use, okay. and then come back on. So those are examples of things Northrop Grumman did in 2015 for recognition in 2016.
In 2016.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about PPG. What did they do?
PPG, they actually installed variable frequency drives on the motors that run their chiller pumps. And that sounds like, well, that wouldn't do that much, but it actually saved an enormous amount of energy, because instead of circulating enough cold water to meet the needs of the facility, all the time, it adjusts the flow to what the need is. So it only uses the energy that's necessary to circulate that water, and it resulted in huge energy savings.
Well, what about Sanmina?
Sanmina has an electronics assembly plant on South Parkway.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, it's
Used
a fairly
to be GTE.
long
Long
time ago.
long
You're
time
too
ago.
young to remember that, Brenda. But I do remember that. In fact, interestingly, when I worked as a nighttime janitor in college, I cleaned that facility when it was GTE.
Well, now I'll have to tell you, that's the reason my husband and I moved to Huntsville at GTE. It was GTE at the time, and they brought us here from Greenwich, Connecticut, and to work here only for 2 years. However, we're still here, but nonetheless, go ahead.
People who come to Huntsville to visit like to stay.
That's right.
And what Sanmina, in their electronics assembly process, they have to solder the components to the PC boards, the printed circuit boards.
Yes.
And they have to clean that surface first using a material called flux. So what they actually did is they got a new wave solder machine that applies the flux and then solders the components to the boards. And this new equipment it's equipped with a nitrogen blanket. And one of the effects of that nitrogen blanket is to reduce the emissions from that flux material.
Okay.
So that's probably more than you wanted to
But
know
that's
about
okay.
what
I mean, Toyota. Now they're a new company here. Well, not fairly
Well,
new.
they've been here, I think they started operation in 2003.
Okay.
So time flies. And they've expanded, gosh, I'm not sure how many times since they built the initial plant, a number of times. Toyota tries to do something to conserve additional energy almost every year. And in 2015, what they did is they actually installed light-emitting diode streetlights on the roadways within their
area.
right, because the plant is fairly large, and
Yes.
and there are actually roadways that lead
Right.
around it, and so they're part of the Toyota campus.
Okay.
And again, significant energy savings resulted from putting in those more efficient streetlights.
And for energy saving, Alabama Center for Sustainable Energy?
They are very involved at educating public school children in sustainability and energy conservation and renewable energy. Those are things that they're very focused on. So they developed materials for use in the public schools in North Alabama.
Oh, really?
They partnered with Clemens High School to build a energy sustainable tiny house, which is
That's
kind of
right.
a
That's
neat
got to be great
thing.
to see.
And now they use that as an educational tool.
Okay,
So,
yes.
so they really were very active in public education in 2015, and they were recognized by the board for that.
4 great companies, huh?
5.
5, I'm sorry, 5 great companies.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do this every year.
We do.
Okay. So we'll have to, next year you'll come on and you'll tell us about the 2017 award winners.
I'd love to. And we already have an idea of some of the players.
How about that? Okay. Listen, air quality information is calculated daily and sent to our local media and TV. Tell us about that.
One of the responsibilities of the Air Pollution Control Program is to monitor the ambient air quality. And when I say ambient air quality, that's
does
the
that mean?
air we're all breathing.
Okay.
So that's the outside air.
Okay.
So we monitor the air quality on a daily basis. And we have our main monitoring station down just off of Airport Road in John Hutt Park.
Okay.
And so, especially for people who are very sensitive, say people who suffer from asthma, current information on what the air quality is can be very important. For most healthy adults, Huntsville's air quality is good, and the relatively small fluctuations we see don't really impact most of us very much. But for people who are very, very sensitive, that can be important information for them to have in as close to a real-time time frame as possible.
Well, you know, as I'm listening to you, I've been told that this is an area that is, geez, if you don't have asthma, you'll get it when you come here.
Well,
Can you speak to that?
well, not asthma so much as allergies. It's usually allergies.
That's what I meant to say. Allergies, not asthma. Allergies.
And
yes.
and in terms of what triggers allergies aren't really considered a pollutant. They're natural. We could call them contaminants, but pollen is probably the most common allergen, and we have a long growing season. We have a lot of rainfall. We're in kind of a valley,
Yes.
and the combination of circumstances make this a perfect location for high pollen counts, and you can even see it. In the spring, you can see a yellow film
Yes,
on your
you
car.
sure
And,
can. Yes.
so the air is clean, but it sometimes has a lot of pollen in
A
it.
lot of pollen. Okay. You also have an air quality report for Huntsville that is prepared by your office and is available on your website. Talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Well, we just spoke about trying to provide current air quality information to the citizens, especially for those who are very sensitive, and that can be important for them in planning activity and that kind of thing. It's also important to look at air quality over the long term. So what the air quality reports do, and we produce those every couple of years, we'll update them, and they show long-term trends in air quality. And if you do take the time to look at that report, you can see that over the history of air monitoring in Huntsville, the air quality has steadily improved, largely because of the effect of the Clean Air Act, and partly because of voluntary things that companies have done.
That companies do, like you talked about earlier.
And yeah,
Sure.
so of course we have an ulterior motive in recognizing these companies
Sure.
because it benefits air quality in the area.
Absolutely, absolutely. Huntsville also has a blasting ordinance, and your division conducts training and certification for that. Talk a little bit about that
We
program.
do. The certification aspect of the blasting program isn't as important as it once was because the state now also provides blaster certifications.
Okay.
And we recognize the state
I see.
certification process. So there are relatively few blasters now that are, because certification from us is only good in Huntsville, but certification by the state is good across the whole state. But there are still a few who only work in Huntsville who are certified through our office. But the blasting program also entails, we have a number of seismographs that we operate. So we continually monitor the quarries and
yes.
and construction blasting as
Okay.
well.
Yes.
And we issue permits for blasting.
Danny, is there a lot of that going on here?
Much less than there used to be.
Okay.
Construction blasting, we don't see nearly as much of it as we did. And the main reason for that is the cost of liability insurance has gotten so expensive for blasters that it has shifted the economics.
Okay.
So we often will see rock hammers, if you've ever, big machines that chip away at rock.
Oh, yes.
We
Okay.
see them being used much more than we used to, and concomitantly we see less blasting activity.
Less blasting, yes.
Of course, for very large projects where there's a great deal of rock that needs to be broken and removed, blasting is the only
necessary.
alternative.
Yes, yes. I've been with the city some 25 years, and remember when the noise control ordinance was brought to the city council. And Danny, that was, there was much controversy about that one. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it does provide some measure of relief, we could call it, to citizens bothered by noise, but it also can restrict activity. Probably the most common types of noise complaints that we get and the most common kind of action that we take involves early morning construction or very early morning refuse collection. So those are two activities that construction companies, particularly in the summer, when it gets so hot in the afternoon, they'd like to start as soon as it's light.
I was going to say this. I mean, both situations are necessary.
They
so
are.
What do you do?
And well, you know, that's one reason I'm glad I'm not an elected official who has to balance everything in the public interest. And I think that's probably the reason the noise ordinance was controversial. And the council had to make a kind of a difficult decision in terms of trying to balance things in the public interest. And I think the noise ordinance does that. So, you know, construction activity is exempt from the sound level limits, but only after 7 o'clock in the morning and before 10 o'clock at night.
Okay.
So that kind of tries to balance the need for construction activity and that it is inherently noisy with the peaceful enjoyment of people's homes.
But what about loud noise in the cars?
Well, there are some things I am very grateful for, and one of them is the Huntsville Police Department enforces the boombox provisions.
Okay. Do they? Okay.
Well, and it makes perfect sense. If a natural resources employee in a natural resources vehicle told you to pull over, they're going to give you a ticket.
Exactly.
If a police officer puts on his lights, you will respond.
You will move over
much more
you will-
quickly.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, that makes sense. Now, on the environmental complaints, citizens who observe or suspect a violation, what should they do?
Well, and there are a number of things. It could be a problem with dust. It could be a problem with someone improperly disposing of, say, they're dumping motor oil into a storm drain.
Oh my, yes.
So there are a number of things that people should know better, but don't always. And if someone observes something that they suspect is an environmental violation, they should call our office and we'll investigate and take action.
Well, what about the indoor inspection? This is something for city residents. This is invaluable. This service is invaluable. I mean, so if there's something in their home that they're not sure about, they can call your office and...
Well, it's not a home inspection like when you sell a house.
Okay.
It's just certain things. Sometimes people have a problem with their indoor air quality and they can't figure out what the problem is. Say they've moved into a residence and they are suffering from...
They're coughing.
Yeah,
Okay.
they are showing some kind of symptom and they have no idea. Then we can talk to them about possible sources of problems within the home. Usually ask them questions. And a very common problem is if there has been water intrusion and people get mold growth. That can trigger allergic responses and things that resemble having a cold or the flu.
So what do you do?
Well, you dry out the material unless it's an absorbent material that basically the mold is fully established, then you have to remove it.
Okay.
But there are things you can do to correct the problem. And you have to stop the source of the water too. Otherwise it does you no good to do the repair unless you stop the water intrusion.
Oh my goodness, okay. But then your folks would come out and share all that information
Right.
with the homeowner.
Yeah.
That's great. One other thing, Natural Resources coordinates activities by the City of Huntsville designed to ensure compliance with state and federal stormwater quality requirements. What What's involved in this most important process?
Well, probably the best example from a stormwater standpoint is when the regulations governing construction stormwater best management practices changed. So we reviewed those regulations in detail and then basically had almost like a seminar for engineering in terms of how the city's requirements for erosion and sediment control could mesh with the more stringent requirements at the federal level. And engineering has implemented that in a way that is as convenient as possible for the construction community.
Okay.
We also will assist other departments with things that may not come up that often. Say there's a change in regulations that affects underground storage tanks. Well, the city doesn't have a lot of underground storage tanks, but there are a few. So we'll make sure that General Services is aware of those requirements. We assist fleet. They have to file reports with ADEM each year regarding the handling of the automotive fluids, the lead acid batteries, the brake cleaning
Fluids and all that.
that is recycled by a local company. They have to account for all that and they have to report it to the state environmental agency. And so we'll always review those reports for them. They prepare them and then we'll review them. And
to make sure that
I think it makes them feel more comfortable if some environmental people have made sure that they didn't make any mistakes.
And that's wonderful to know that, you work, of course, most departments do work together quite well, but our departments certainly will call on you for
right,
any
and we
questions
encourage them to do that because it is far better to ask and make sure that you're doing things properly than to find out later you did not.
That's exactly right. Well, thanks so very much for taking the time to highlight all the information about your department that does so much in the city of Huntsville, and we appreciate your leadership. Danny, you've been here how long now?
Oh my goodness.
I shouldn't have asked.
I've been with the city. I just recently had my 35th anniversary with the city.
Oh my goodness.
It doesn't seem like that long. And I've been in my current position since 1994, so 22 years.
22 years. Well, we appreciate your leadership and we're glad you're there.
I'm glad I'm here too.
We're glad you're there.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks again. My guest today has been Danny Shea, Director of the Natural Resources and Environmental Management Department of the City of Huntsville. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Inside Huntsville, a great place to live, work, and play. I'm Brenda Martin. Have a great day.